We're going to start the next session, which will be on behavioral treatment in autism. And our first speaker will be our own Amanda Gulsrud. Amanda is an assistant clinical professor here at UCLA in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences. She's also the clinical director of our Child and Adult Neurodevelopmental, or CAN clinic. And she's a CART member, so please welcome Amanda Gulsrud.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope to keep you awake. I know we're getting to the twilight stages of the day, but I will have a little pop quiz, just so you know, in the middle. So I'm warning you all. So today I'm going to give you a little overview of where we are in the field in terms of behavioral treatments, how things have progressed, and where we're going right now, what the future holds in this exciting area of research. And when I was thinking about this talk, I was really struck by how much the field has already changed. You know, it was just 60, 70 years ago that we were talking about refrigerator moms and institutionalization and these horrible words about kids not being able to learn when they had diagnoses like this. And to see the shift and to know, for example, the important role of parents in the outcomes of their children, right? To know that we're now including these individuals, inclusive workplaces, and individuals on the autism spectrum are going to college and leading meaningful lives. These are all very important things. And with that, we've seen a proliferation of programs and interventions for individuals with ASD. And many of them, especially when you look at kind of early intervention work, has focused on that core social communication impairment and improving that. But many of the studies that we have to date haven't really carefully measured those outcomes. And Dr. DiStefano did a great job of telling us a little bit about that issue around measurement and picking meaningful outcomes. So we have a range of interventions that have come online. Many of them are a form of ABA, which has the most empirical evidence behind it. The most structured form is discrete trial training, developed here and tested using single subject design in the 70s by Dr. Ivar Lovaas. And I'm just going to show you a little clip of what, kind of more contemporary DTT looks like nowadays.
Make same. Wow, Sarah, that's making same so good. Make same. Wow, you got it, Sarah.
In the interest of time, I'm not going to show, but they do 2 more trials, right? So there's this kind of mass trial that goes on, and everything is broken down into little steps. And that has, in general, been a pretty effective way to teach young children with ASD. And in fact, about 50% of kids are going to improve using these types of methods. And there's been many replication studies that have suggested this. And in general, when we look at outcomes for DTT, they've really focused on core impairments in cognition. So we are seeing IQ gains. We're seeing children in some of the original studies being mainstreamed into full inclusion settings more regularly. But we've noticed that the difficulties in those core impairments, social, language, and adaptive functioning, still really are persisting. And so there's been some criticisms of this approach in the past. And, many have talked about kind of the poor generalizability of some of these approaches. That if you teach a child in one way how to respond, are they going to be able to perform in the real world when we have all these dynamic social expectations? And so some more contemporary methods of ABA have come online. They're called naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions. And I'm going to take a moment to show you a clip from the Early Start Denver model, which is a form of NDBI. And this is where the pop quiz is going to come in. Just look at some of the differences in the approach.
Wow. Lots of fun things for us. What do you want to play? Do you want to play with the animals or the baby? Oh, you found the baby. Great bag is closed. Let's open it. That's a pretty good idea. Here we go. Let's see what we can feed the baby. Baby looks very hungry. Look, what is it? The baby looks very hungry. Why don't you give her something to eat?
Okay, so still a form of ABA, but did you notice differences? Pretty stark differences in the approach, right? So this has kind of come online in reaction to some of those more rote routine ways to teach young children on the spectrum. And in general, it's really emphasizing that naturalistic, kind of spontaneous, creative environment, and really done in more of a play-based setting. So you saw that interventionist really was providing opportunity for the child to initiate and choose the activity, as well as developmentally appropriate goals around kind of play with baby doll for that little girl. Now, this is a different form of ABA than that kind of classic DTT trial. But interestingly, we actually find pretty similar results. So we find that we can make changes in some of those cognitive and adaptive areas of development regardless of the method we use. Okay, and I think that's really important for us to understand that, it's not one method over the other at this point in the game. It's really trying to instead think about which types of intervention approaches might be best for an individual profile. And it's important to know that all forms of ABA are making gains in kind of cognition, adaptive functioning, but maybe only some are targeting some of those core areas of impairment. And so the field is really moving now towards kind of addressing heterogeneity. And the way we're doing that is we're thinking about targeted approaches for targeted groups of individuals. We want to know if you come in with a certain type of profile, what type of intervention do we need to give you to maximize gains? And so we have an intervention here called Jasper. And since so many of you were in the room last year, you know a bit about what Jasper is, but it is a form of NDBI, so more naturalistic approach to ABA. We are focused on very targeted outcomes in terms of what we feel is very core to the disorder, so social communication, language, and engagement. And we've had lots of research effects in fairly short periods of time. So we have found using Jasper pretty consistent effects and effects on joint engagement, which is one of our primary outcomes of Jasper. But I think it's more important to know that I pressed a button that made things go black. What button was that? Well, that's crazy. Whoop, whoop. Okay, this is not my pointer. So even using therapist-directed Jasper methods, teaching parents to implement the method, and even going into schools and teaching teachers how to use the methods, we're finding consistent effects on this joint engagement variable. We also, Dr. DiStefano did a great job of explaining this, so I won't belabor it, but we do have longitudinal outcomes as well. And as far as I know, I think it's the longest longitudinal outcome study from kind of a more targeted intervention, where 4 to 5 years later, we're still seeing effects on language after about a 6-week intervention of Jasper when the child was a preschooler. But I think more interesting now is thinking about moving towards just this model of like what works for a group of individuals. That's interesting to know that maybe Jasper or these other ABA approaches work, but how does it work? Because if we can unpackage how an intervention works, we're going to be able to better make determinations about who needs it. And so we've thought about unpackaging Jasper. We've thought about the core components of the intervention, and we're really thinking about, could we select, if we have a limited amount of time with a family, are there really core components of that intervention that are absolutely necessary to maximize gains for that individual child? And are there others that are maybe more ancillary? And so we've identified 4 what we believe are more core strategies. They're things like environmental arrangement, which is, the selection of materials, the developmental appropriateness of this, the arrangement of the room, something called mirrored pacing, which is really this whole idea of shared turn-taking in the interaction, mirroring the child's actions and expanding upon their ideas in the interaction, communication strategies, modeling language at the child's level, saying less actually as an adult to allow for room for the child to say more in the interaction, and then prompting strategies to scaffold that child only as much as they need. And so we look to see, what was most related to our primary outcome of joint engagement. And we found, lo and behold, that really the active ingredient for the particular outcome of engagement was the strategy or component of mirrored pacing. So if you're looking at a particular outcome, which would be joint engagement, this is an absolutely necessary component of this particular package. And most interventions just give you the whole package, and they say, well, you have to do all of these things in order to get these gains. And that's absolutely not true. It depends on what your outcome is. So maybe if I slotted in play here, it might be a different strategy that we really need, or a different combination of strategies. But that's the way we need to be thinking. We need to not think about a package as much as let's dismantle the package and really figure out why that intervention is working. In addition, we want to know for whom is the intervention working. And so we want to address all that variability we see in children when they come in the door clinically. And for me, I really want to understand, what does that child need first? What does that child need now to maximize their gains? And so a particular subgroup we've been very interested in is the minimally verbal population. And Dr. Connie Kazri and colleagues have thought a lot about what it means to be minimally verbal. And a few key points are that actually most are not nonverbal completely. They actually have some ability to speak and communicate. They may just do it rarely or in very, very specific contexts. And we need to carefully define who this population is so that we can identify them early and get them the interventions they need. So we do this right now by kind of a count of functional words in any given time. And what's interesting is, for in general, what people do in community is a child's not responding at the rate that we want them to respond. We either give them more of the same, so we increase the intensity of that intervention, or we give them less because we think, well, that child's not responding, so they may not need that service, or there's nothing else we can do. And so we've challenged that thinking, and we've tried to think of new creative ways to work with this population to really boost their communication overall using multimodal communication means. And so we have the school-age population who remains minimally verbal after receiving 2 full years of intensive intervention. So we know it's not just that they hadn't had exposure to high-quality intervention. And we're defining them as less than 20 functional words in a language sample in a given period of time. And all children, what's important to know about this is we're using that SMART design, and we're giving all children Jasper, because you know what? These children all need something that we think is really good. We are not going to put them in a waitlist condition. We're not going to put them in a no treatment control. We're going to give them all what we think really will help them gain language, but half are going to be randomized to also getting a speech generating device, which is really that iPad, right, with the Go Talk, or the iPad with Proliquo. And this is the SMART design we've used. And what I love about this, that we have the ability to do this now as researchers and working in behavioral treatment, is that we can randomize, so we can still keep the scientific structure of our question, but we can also look at how that child is responding to that given treatment. And just like you would do, a good clinician would do, we have the ability to change things for that child, but still carefully measure outcomes. So we know what is working and why it's working. And I think that is where we're moving as a field. We're moving to being able to tailor these interventions, but also know why we're doing what we're doing in a very meaningful way. And so, lo and behold, Dr. DeStefano showed this graph, so we won't belabor it. But just to tell you that the group with the speech generating device, we're calling it AAC, had a faster acceleration in their communicative utterances over the group that just got Jasper with kind of typical expressive language techniques. And again, we see this nice treatment effect. Notice that all children are improving, regardless of the treatment they get. So Jasper is having some nice effect regardless, but when you give a child access to multimodal communication, guess what? They use it. And it's a really important thing to think about in the community, because I can't tell you how many times I talk to families and I talk to speech language pathologists and other clinicians, and there's not a great understanding of why we might add a device to try to get a child to talk more. But that's essentially what this data is suggesting for us. In addition to kind of addressing all the heterogeneity in the child, I've had a particular interest in thinking about all the variability in the parents I see that come into these interactions. And so when we think about this, it's a complicated beast in that I think there's a lot clinically that a parent brings into an intervention, especially a parent-mediated intervention, where we're going to train that parent in these strategies and how to work with a child who a lot of parents feel like they haven't been very effective so far in helping their child's development. And so we have been thinking about baseline characteristics. This is really a lot of stuff, but really just kind of look here. We've been using a statistical approach. One of our biostatistician students is helping me because I don't do enough k-means clustering. But we want to be able to group dyads in meaningful ways at baseline and see if those groups, if they behave differently when we give them interventions. And so you can see down here, we were able to meaningfully group a bunch of mothers and children who recently underwent an early intervention with us. And what these clusters essentially showed us was that if you look at cluster two is a group of highly stressed parents. So I didn't emphasize this. I think they're all stressed, guys. Don't get me wrong. Every parent who comes to see us is stressed. And we know that parents of children with autism are stressed in general. But there's a group that's a little more stressed that come in at baseline. So we're thinking about wellness and what that means for that family and what they're struggling with when they come in. They actually have younger children, and they're a little older themselves. So that's the profile of that group. And then opposite to that, we have a group that's a little more mildly stressed with a little older children, and they're a little younger group. So this is how we're starting to kind of think about characterizing. And we're looking at play outcomes here, pre to post. And essentially, we're starting to get some traction on there's groups of individuals who may respond at faster rates to the intervention. There's groups of individuals who we may want to tailor the intervention, tweak it a little bit, depending on the characteristics of that dyad coming in. And I think there's a really important piece here about parental well-being, mental health, stress levels that are going to predict how well that parent and that child does in intervention over time. And we want to try to capture that in these research designs so that we can inform others and eventually let that come into clinical practice. And so that's where I'm going next. I don't know if everyone is following me, but I hope so, because I think it's an important piece. And you can see we're kind of going everywhere. I'm talking right now about early intervention because my colleagues who are coming after me are going to talk about school age and adolescent behavioral treatments. But we've branched into neurogenetic syndromes with Dr. Jeste, and we've been looking in under-resourced communities to see what they need. Is there something different? Is there a different dose? Is there a different timing? We've been using these smart designs that I love because they allow me as a clinician to actually do what I feel is right, but also measure that change over time. We're using medication augmentation. We're working with minimally verbals. And currently, we're enrolling for a new study that's looking at 12 to 36-month-olds. So this is going to be toddlers, and this is part of our new ACE study. And what I'm excited about is we're actually, instead of testing one intervention over another or, that type of a design, which is much more common in the RCT world, we're using a smart design to actually randomize at different points in the intervention. But we care more about the sequence, the order, the timing of the intervention, as opposed to which one is better than the other. And the hypothesis here is when you're working with parents, they may need more support for themselves first. Okay, we may need to work with them and hear them and work on their needs before we throw a huge Jasper package at them and say, okay, now you're going to learn all these strategies to interact with your child, right? So it could be that certain types of parents need a different sequence, right? They might need that kind of more slow approach to intervention before they're able to move to that next more active phase of learning and intervention. And so I'm going to conclude because I'm getting the flashing minute sign on me. So, of course, if you'd like to learn anything more about Jasper or about our work, you can visit us. And thank you very much.